After witnessing a bizarre traumatic incident involving a patient, Dr. Rose Cotter starts experiencing frightening occurrences that she can't explain. Welcome back to Movies Explained. Today's film is a mystery horror from 2022 titled, Smile. The film begins with a scene in a room where we see a lady who has died from a drug overdose, and the camera pans out to reveal a young girl, the overdosed woman's daughter, standing at the door. Cut to the present, and we see that the young girl is Dr. Rose Cotter, who is jolted awake from her nightmare by a phone call informing her of an incoming patient, as she is now a therapist. Carl, the patient, is a disturbed man who keeps emphasizing the fact that everyone, including himself, will die. Rose tries to comfort him by saying she understands and wants to help, but Carl keeps repeating the lines. Dr. Morgan Desai, Rose's supervisor, speaks with her about a patient she admitted who has no insurance, and Rose argues that she needs treatment. Morgan wants her to run it by him next time because the board is on his back about paying out of pocket for another bed. When Morgan discovers that Rose has been working since the previous day, he requests that she take the day off and rest. As she begins to clock out, Rose receives another call for another mentally disturbed patient, a lady named Laura Weaver, who is being brought in. Laura rants about seeing various evil people haunt her after witnessing her professor Gabriel Munoz bludgeon himself with a hammer just a few days earlier. Rose attempts to address the issue without attaching any spiritual meaning to it. Laura becomes enraged when she realizes Rose is not truly listening to her but is simply trying to be professional. She vents and looks away. When she turns around, she begins to scream and insists the entity is present in the room. Rose rushes to call for help, but when she turns around, she sees Laura with a smile on her face as she slashes her face with a piece from the broken vase, from the chin down to her neck. Rose stares, eyes wide opened in horror. Soon after, two detectives arrive to question Rose about the incident, one of whom is her ex-boyfriend Joel. Later, Rose arrives at her house, where she is greeted by her cat Mustache. Noticing blood on her shirt, she jumps in the shower and pours herself a glass of wine to relax. When she turns around, she sees a woman that looks like Laura, standing in her house staring at her, and she is startled when her fiancé Trevor calls her name, causing her to drop her glass. Rose tells Trevor about her day, prompting Trevor to suggest that they cancel their dinner with Rose's sister Holly and her husband Greg. They eventually meet up at the dinner, where Rose appears to be lost in her own thoughts, recalling what had happened earlier. Holly discovers that Rose is zoned out when she brings up her son Jackson's upcoming birthday, and Rose has no idea what they are discussing. When Holly suggests that her workplace is taking up too much of her time when private institutions would pay her more, Rose snaps back that she loves her job and not for the money. The next day, Rose is in her office, standing at the window side, when she receives a call from Holly, apologizing for the argument at the dinner. Holly also advises Rose on the type of birthday gift Jackson would appreciate. Rose's attention is drawn by someone who appears to be Laura, who is standing outside staring at her. Walking down the hallway, Rose notices Carl in his room with a big smile on his face. As she walks in, Carl begins screaming that Rose is going to die. She calls for restraint only to find Carl back to being gentle and calm. Her boss Dr. Morgan thinks she overreacted calling for restraint and wants her to take a paid week off due to the trauma she had experienced. Rose goes ahead and buys Jackson a toy train before returning home. She starts wrapping the gift and decides to take a break to refill her wine, but the security alarm goes off, causing her to drop her glass. She deactivates the alarm and notices the back window is open. Seconds later, she receives a phone call from the alarm company, who asks her a series of security questions. When she tells them she's alone, she's asked if she's sure and told to look behind her. Terrified, Rose slowly looks back only to hear the phone ring, realizing that she was never on the phone in the first place. It's the alarm company for real this time, and the police are dispatched to investigate. As the police confirm there are no signs of intrusion at the residence, Trevor arrives wanting to know what's going on. Rose prepares food for the cat while explaining to Trevor that she accidentally activated the alarm because she doesn't want to appear insane. She asks Trevor for assistance in finding the cat because she hasn't seen him all day. A nightmare about her late mother keeps her awake at night. She stands up and begins to listen to the recording of her session with Laura. However, she is terrified when the ghost appears screaming, knocking her off her chair. She runs to the kitchen to get a knife when Trevor dashes over to her, screaming for her to put the knife down. The next day Rose decides to visit her own therapist, Dr. Madeline Northcott, the therapist who helped her overcome the death of her mother. She explains her situation to her therapist, who refuses to prescribe the medication Rose asks for until their next session. Rose attends Jackson's birthday party and presents her gift to Jackson. When he opens the gift, he finds Rose's dead cat inside. Everyone is terrified and stand there staring at Rose in shock. Rose tries to explain that she knows nothing about the dead cat in the box. She begins to scream when she sees one of the mothers at the party with the evil smile. She falls into the glass table behind her, shattering it as it cuts into her flesh. At the ER in the hospital, her boss Dr. Morgan advises she sees someone for help. Trevor drives home with Rose, who tries to explain that she is not insane but is being haunted. Trevor believes she is insane because she wants him to believe a ghost story. He believes Rose had something to do with the cat's death and decides she needs help. He storms into the house, leaving Rose alone. Rose begins her investigation and looks up Laura's schoolteacher Gabriel Munoz and searches for his wife Victoria. Victoria explains to Rose that Gabriel had been acting strangely days before his suicide after he had witnessed another woman, Anna Powell, commit suicide. She reveals different eerie drawings of the strange smile. Rose claims she is also experiencing the same phenomenon. When Victoria discovers Rose is not a reporter, she sends her away. When Rose pays a visit to her ex Joel in his apartment, Joel assists her in looking up Anna Powell in the police database, who died a few days before Gabriel after committing suicide, with Gabriel witnessing it. As the investigation continues, they discover Anna had witnessed a man stab himself with a shear at a gas station, and when they zoomed in on the man's face, they noticed he was smiling as well. Rose arrives home to find Trevor had already invited her therapist Madeline. Rose snaps at Trevor as she believes he is trying to avoid the stress of handling her case and doesn't want any difficulty for himself. She gets angry and storms out of the house. Rose heads to Holly's house, where she explains the entity and the curse to Holly, also showing her some pictures for proof. Holly tells Rose she is acting exactly like their mom before committing suicide. Rose explains that Holly never really cared about their mother and was never around prior to her suicide. Holly leaves Rose outside, telling her how traumatized Jackson was after the dead cat incident. Rose is sitting in her car, gasping for air, when she notices Holly coming out of the house in her direction. When she turns to look, she is horrified to see Holly's head snap, but it turns out that the entity is manipulating her thoughts once more. Joel explains to Rose on a phone call that there are 20 cases but 19 suicides with similar examples to what she sees. The remaining one case is in prison after he had killed a random woman, but a witness to the murder resumed the cycle. The next day, Joel takes Rose to a prison, where she meets Robert Talley, the sole survivor of the chain of suicides. He explains to her that he had to kill someone to avoid becoming the entity's next victim, and that if you kill someone in front of a witness, the witness becomes the new victim, continuing the cycle of suicides. When Rose yells that she can't kill anyone, Robert freaks out, realizing Rose witnessed a suicide. As he struggles with the chains, he is immediately restrained. Rose returns home and resumes her investigation until she is interrupted by Madeline. While talking with her, she receives a call from the real Madeline and is terrified as she realizes she has been talking with the entity the entire time. It smiles and informs Rose that it is almost time before pressing Rose against the wall. Rose heads to the hospital armed with a knife and enters Carl's room. Carl screams in terror when he sees Rose. Morgan rushes into the room to find Rose stabbing Carl multiple times, but this appears to be a nightmare as she wakes up in her car as Morgan walks up to her inquiring what she's doing there, and when he notices the knife, he tries to persuade her to come inside and rest, but Rose just drives away. She decides to isolate herself by driving to the home where she grew up and where her mother died. On the way, she gets a call from Joel alerting her that the police are looking for her. She tells Joel that she feels the only way to break the pattern is for her to isolate herself. Without someone to witness her suicide, the cycle cannot be passed on to a new victim. At night, she sits on a chair with a lamp and waits for the entity. As she follows the sounds, it leads her to her mother's room, where she sees her mother, who apologizes for being a bad mother and blames Rose for her death. Rose expresses to her mother how she felt until she realizes that this can't be real. When she tells her mother that she's not real, her mother becomes angry and transforms into the entity, a tall long-haired monster with a smile on its face, which begins choking Rose until she sets it on fire. She walks out of the house as it burns to the ground. She returns to Joel's house, finally free, and tells him she has defeated the entity. She apologizes to Joel for pushing him out of her life due to her fears and insecurities, and she asks to spend the night at Joel's. When Joel looks up at her with a wide smile on his face and begins laughing, she panics and flees the house terrified. Running outside, she discovers that it was all an illusion and that she is still in front of her mother's house. As she looks around in disbelief, she hears Joel get out of his car and call her name. She screams no repeatedly as she runs back inside the house, knowing that Joel is now a witness and the cycle will continue. Joel kicks open the door to find Rose soaked in fuel. She turns around to Joel, a wide smile on her face, and lights herself on fire and passes the cycle over to Joel. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe for more videos.